She was pushed into the ocean pregnant. But what washed ashore changed everything. Welcome to the channel where every story begins with a heartbeat and ends with a little more hope. If you're watching this right now, take a moment to comment below and tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far these stories travel. And if today's tale speaks to your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There's another powerful chapter coming tomorrow, and trust me, you won't want to miss what unfolds next. The tide had just begun to retreat when the first light of dawn stretched across the Oregon shoreline, painting the waves in silver and shadow. The beach was quiet, save for the distant call of gulls and the steady hush of the sea breathing in and out. Jack Turner, a 48-year-old former rescue diver who had long since given up saving anyone, including himself, stood near the edge of the dunes, his boots buried in the cool sand. The wind tugged at his flannel jacket, but he didn't move. This was his ritual. Early mornings with the ocean, silent and undisturbed. Beside him, a boy crouched low to the ground, his focus locked on a fan of seashells he was arranging by size and color. Eli, just 13, rarely spoke, but Jack had learned that silence didn't mean emptiness. Sometimes the quiet ones heard the world more clearly than the rest of us. Then Eli stopped. His fingers froze mid-motion as his gaze locked on the surf. He pointed. Jack followed his line of sight and squinted against the soft haze rising from the waves. At first it looked like driftwood caught in the seaweed. But then he saw it. An arm. Pale. Still. Reaching. His body moved before his mind could. Catch up. Stay here, he told Eli sharply, already sprinting toward the shoreline. The figure lay tangled in kelp and torn cloth, half buried by the shifting tide. A woman, face down, unmoving. Jack rolled her over gently. Her skin was ice cold, lips tinged blue. Her long, dark hair clung to her cheeks like seaweed. But it wasn't just the shock of her near drowning that stopped him. It was her swollen belly. She was heavily pregnant. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, desperate. There, a pulse. Faint. Fragile. But alive. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms. She was heavier than she looked. Pregnancy and seawater exact their toll. But Jack moved through the sand with quiet urgency, his boots digging deep with every step. Blankets, he called out. Eli was already running to the truck at the trailhead, as if he'd known what was coming. Jack reached the edge of the dunes and laid the woman down just long enough to cradle her more securely. She shivered in his arms. Then her eyelids fluttered. She tried to speak, but all that escaped was a soft, broken breath. "I've got you," Jack whispered. His voice was softer than he expected. "You're safe now." That was how it began. Not with a plan, not with a rescue mission, but with a stranger, a breath, and a decision. Neither Jack nor Eli could have known that this moment would change everything, that the woman in his arms wasn't just fighting to survive, but carrying the miracle that would rewrite all their lives. And yet, as the sea pulled back and the sky brightened overhead, something in Jack's chest stirred. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The woman's name was Hannah Rivers. She whispered it hours later, wrapped in every blanket Jack owned, her voice raw and barely more than breath. She lay curled on the pull-out sofa in front of the fireplace, her body trembling from shock, her hand never leaving the curve of her pregnant belly. Jack had lit the fire the moment they got back to the cabin. Eli had stacked the wood. Neither of them asked questions, not yet. Outside, the wind picked up. Rain tapped the windows in uneven rhythms, the Oregon sky turning darker by the hour. Jack sat nearby, sipping stale coffee, pretending he wasn't watching her every breath. Eli had fallen asleep near her, wrapped in an old quilt, as if keeping watch without needing to say a word. When she finally spoke again, her voice broke on the syllables. "They pushed me." Jack looked up slowly. "Who?" She hesitated. Then her eyes locked on his, and there it was. Terror. The kind that doesn't come from a bad dream, the kind that lives in your bones. "My husband," she said. "Charles. We were on his yacht." I told him I was going to testify, expose the things he's done. He smiled, poured me champagne. Then he said, "You won't make it to Monday." I thought he was joking, then he pushed me overboard. Jack didn't say a word. His fingers tightened around the coffee mug. "I don't know how I made it to shore," Hannah continued. "I hit the water, the cold just—" She stopped herself, breathing through the memory. "I should be dead." "But you're not," Jack said. "You're here." Her lip quivered. "That man, he has people, lawyers, influence. He'll come looking, he'll try to take her." Her hand shifted protectively to her belly. Jack stood slowly and crossed to the fireplace. He knelt beside her, his eyes steady. "Let me be clear," he said, his voice low and firm. "No one is taking anything from you. Not while you're under my roof." Something flickered in her expression. Hope, or maybe disbelief. "You don't even know me," she said. "I didn't know Eli either," Jack replied, nodding toward the sleeping boy. "Found him 3 years ago, alone, after the accident. He never said much, didn't have to, I saw enough." Hannah's eyes softened. "Is he your son?" Jack hesitated. "Not by blood. But yeah, he's mine." Silence settled between them again. But it wasn't empty. It was full, thick with things they weren't ready to say yet. "I didn't pull you out of that water just so you could drown on land," Jack said. "So until you say otherwise, you're staying." That night, the storm outside clawed at the cabin like a beast, but inside the fire burned steady, and as Jack drifted into sleep in the old recliner across the room, he knew something had changed. He wasn't just protecting a stranger anymore. He was protecting a future neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed. The storm hit just after midnight. Not a gentle rain or passing wind. This was the kind of storm that shook trees from their roots and howled like it remembered every pain ever suffered along the coast. Rain slammed sideways against the windows. Thunder rolled in from the Pacific like a living beast, and the fire inside the cabin hissed in protest with every gust of wind. Jack stood at the front door, hand on the frame, his breath steady but shallow. Something in his gut told him this storm wasn't just weather. It was warning. Hannah was asleep on the pullout, her hands resting over her belly. Eli sat nearby, flipping through an old comic, pretending not to be worried. But Jack knew better. The kid could read tension better than most adults. Then it happened. A sharp gasp, a crack of breath that sliced through the storm. Jack spun around. Hannah gripped the edge of the couch, eyes wide with pain. "It's happening," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. "Jack, she's coming." Jack rushed to her side. "How far apart?" 3, maybe 4 minutes, she winced. Another contraction hit hard and fast. "Oh God, you're okay," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We're doing this here. No hospital. Roads are flooded and there's no time." Hannah shook her head, sweat already beating at her temples. "I can't, Jack, I can't do this." "Yes, you can. Look at me. I've done this before." "You have?" He nodded just once. "Long time ago. I helped a woman through labor. It wasn't mine, but it mattered." Eli moved without being asked. He grabbed the emergency kit from under the counter, laid out clean towels, bottled water, a flashlight. His hands were steady. His eyes never left hers. Jack helped Hannah to the bed and braced her back with pillows. "We're gonna get through this. All 3 of us." Contractions came faster, harder. Hannah cried out, her fingers digging into the blanket. Fear gripped her chest, but beneath it was something deeper, fierce, primal. "She's in distress," Hannah whispered. "I can feel it." "She's strong," Jack replied. "Like her mom." The next scream was loud enough to make the windows shake. And then suddenly, it was quiet. A cry. A small, raw, perfect cry that filled the entire cabin like the first breath of spring after a long, brutal winter. Jack wrapped the baby in a warm towel and gently placed her in Hannah's arms. Her hands trembled as she cradled the tiny life that had somehow survived betrayal, salt water, and storm. "She's perfect," Jack said, his voice cracking for the first time. Tears streamed down Hannah's cheeks. I didn't think we'd make it. Jack looked at her, at Eli, who stood silent and awed, and at the little girl whose cry felt like redemption. You did, he said. And now she's here. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, something stronger had taken root. Not just survival. A beginning. They named her Grace. It was the only name that ever made sense. After all they'd endured, the betrayal, the storm, the firelight labor that ended in a miracle, it felt like the right word for a baby who should have never made it, but did. In the days that followed, the cabin shifted. Not in structure, but in spirit. Grace brought a kind of stillness that came only after chaos. Jack reinforced the doors, added more wood to the pile, and taught Hannah how to hold the revolver. He kept locked in the cabinet. She didn't like it, but she learned. Some storms didn't come from the sky. They came in silence, with paperwork and power. Hannah sang lullabies again. Sometimes they were real songs, sometimes just hums. Eli made Grace a cradle out of reclaimed pine and lined it with a blanket his mother once made. He never said much, but he always showed up. They lived in that rhythm for nearly 2 months until the letter came. Jack had driven into town for supplies and returned with a small bundle of mail, bills, flyers, and an envelope with no return address, sealed tight and dry despite the rain. Inside was a single page, typed in cold, calculated language. Mrs. Rivers, as a courtesy to our shared history, I extend the opportunity to resolve matters privately. You and the child will be provided for, generously, in exchange for a simple statement confirming your voluntary departure. Decline, and I will exercise full legal authority to pursue custody and reputation repair. Signed only, Charles. Jack didn't say a word. He slid the letter across the kitchen table as Hannah washed bottles at the sink, Grace sleeping softly against her chest in the sling. Her eyes scanned the page. She didn't speak right away, but Jack saw the way her jaw tightened, the way her fingers curled protectively around Grace's head. He's bluffing, she said at last. No, Jack replied. He's reaching, and men like him only reach when they feel control slipping. She nodded slowly. I don't want his money, but I do want this to end. I want my daughter to grow up without hiding. That night, Jack pulled out the lockbox. From the mantel, inside were documents, copies of old bruised photographs, voice messages, torn records. Everything Hannah had once gathered before the yacht, before she was thrown into the sea. He laid it on the table like a weapon. You don't run anymore, he said. You fight. The next morning, Hannah dressed Grace in a navy blue onesie and tied her into the sling. Jack drove them into town. They didn't enter the courthouse to beg. They entered to deliver. Hannah left a sealed envelope with the court clerk, her statement, the evidence, her refusal to disappear. When the woman at the desk asked if she needed protection, Hannah smiled faintly and answered, I already have it. And as they walked back to the truck, Jack at her side, Eli waiting with a hand-carved wooden star in his palm. Hannah looked down at her daughter. This was no longer just survival. This was legacy. 18 years passed, not like a sprint, but like the slow unfolding of something sacred. Grace grew up between pine trees and crashing waves, her crib once rocked by storms, now wrapped in sunlight and lullabies. She was sharp like her mother, steady like Jack, and carried a silence in her that mirrored Eli's. But unlike the pain that silence once held, hers was full of listening, of presence, of empathy learned from people who had nothing left to prove, only love left to give. On the eve of her high school graduation, a letter arrived. Not a threat this time, not a warning, just a crisp, formal envelope stamped from New York. You are invited to deliver the keynote address at the Northwest Pacific Leadership Forum, topic From Silence to Service, youth speaker, Grace Rivers. The venue, Vail Global Industries headquarters. The irony struck like a ghost tapping on old glass. Charles Vail, her biological father, was dying. His empire was intact, but his voice had long since faded from the news. He hadn't fought Hannah's custody claim, hadn't tried again. But now he'd extended this. A stage, a moment, a final thread. Grace didn't answer right away. She sat by the fire that night, journal in her lap, steam curling from her tea. Hannah sat across from her, hands wrapped around her own cup, eyes softer with time but never smaller. "You don't owe him your voice," her mother said. "I know," Grace replied, "but maybe I owe mine to the people who never had a Jack, or an Eli, or a you." So she said yes. On the day of the speech, she stood in the city, so far from the cabin that had raised her. The glass building loomed tall, sterile. Her dress was simple, her voice steady. She carried nothing flashy, just her journal and the seashell necklace her mother once wore. In the green room, a knock at the door. Charles entered, slower now, leaning on a cane. He looked thinner than she imagined, but the eyes were still sharp. "You don't look like me," he said. "I wasn't raised by you," she replied. He offered her a letter. "I wrote this the week you were born. I never sent it." She didn't open it. "I forgive you," she said. "Not for you, for me." And then she walked onto the stage. Her voice didn't tremble. "I was born into a storm," she began, "but I was raised by hands that stayed. A man who pulled my mother from the sea, a boy who built my cradle from driftwood, and a woman who chose to fight instead of vanish. I speak not for revenge, but for legacy, the kind you build not with money but with presence." The crowd fell silent. Back at the cabin, Jack carved a new sign. Waves of Grace Foundation, a safe harbor for new beginnings. And when Grace returned, she stood on the porch, looked toward the sea, and whispered to the wind, "I'm home, not just where she came from, but where she belonged." If this story touched something in your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Take a moment to scroll down and share your thoughts in the comments, whether it's a memory this reminded you of, a moment of grace in your own life, or simply where in the world you're watching from. These stories are not just meant to be heard, they're meant to connect us. Maybe you've been through your own storm. Maybe you know what it feels like to start over, or maybe you just needed to be reminded today that healing is possible. Even in the quiet corners of the world, every comment adds another voice to the conversation, another ripple in the water. And your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read right now. So don't be shy. Tell us what stayed with you after watching. What part made you pause? What moment felt personal? And if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe. There's another chapter coming tomorrow, and trust me, you won't want to miss where this journey leads next. From our little storytelling corner to yours, thank you, truly, for being here.